I'll make them suffer. Blackhawk roars in the snow, clutching his wife Mourning Dove's lifeless body, her blood spreading red across the white ground. Their daughter, not yet 7, lying motionless beside her. The settlers burned his village, killed his wife and daughter, and shattered his home. Suddenly, a faint cry echoes, leading him to a nearby snowdrift. He digs frantically, finding his son, Lone Wolf, a months-old infant, wrapped in his mother's blanket, alive but trembling. Rage blazes within Blackhawk, his fists clenching as Lone Wolf's feeble cries ignite his vengeful heart. But these are no ordinary settlers. What ruthless power is he about to face? Something he doesn't know, something that will change his life forever. Blackhawk, a Comanche chief of 40 winters, clenches his scarred fists, his strength forged through battles yet softened by love for his tribe and family. Days ago, he traded peacefully with the Kiowa, unaware that settlers would torch his village, slay Mourning Dove, and steal his people as slaves, leaving only his infant son Lone Wolf, now cradled in his arms. With his home reduced to ashes and danger lurking, he trudges toward a hidden canyon, torn between shielding his fragile son or hunting the killers who shattered his world. Hooves churned the snow as the Comanche chief rode back from a trade with the Kiowa, the winter air biting his face. A thick column of black smoke curled above his village, tightening his chest with dread. He spurred his horse into a gallop across the frozen plain and burst into the camp, where smoldering tents cast eerie shadows and broken bodies littered the ground. Mourning Dove lay among them, her blood staining the snow, their young daughter still beside her, both lifeless. Grief brought him to his knees, his trembling hands clutching his wife's cold fingers as a choked sob escaped his lips. The chief's heart pounded as he whispered, "Lone Wolf," and began searching for his infant son. A faint cry cut through the howling wind, guiding him to a nearby snowdrift. He clawed through the ice, unearthing a small bundle wrapped in Mourning Dove's tattered blanket. His son, barely a few months old, shivered in his arms, alive but frail. Rage surged through him, and he stood, eyes locked on the western horizon where settler smoke rose. The settlers had destroyed his home, but he vowed they would pay. "I'll find you," he growled, pressing Lone Wolf close. Torn between vengeance and his son's survival, he mounted his horse, tucking the infant inside his cloak, and rode toward the hidden canyon, determined to protect his son and rally his people for retribution. The wind howled through the snowy ravine, masking Lone Wolf's weak cries as the chief urged his horse toward the hidden canyon. He dismounted in the shadow of jagged cliffs, where survivors gathered in a makeshift camp, their faces etched with grief. Women sat huddled, and wounded warriors leaned against rocks. Red Bear, a young warrior, limped forward, his arm bound in bloodied cloth, and spoke in a low, bitter voice. "Isaac Cole's men attacked at dawn, taking our women and children." The name ignited fury in the chief's heart, his fist tightening around the tomahawk at his belt. Lone Wolf's shivering frame grounded him, reminding him of his duty as a father. He declared, "We strike back at first light," his voice resolute despite the pain. Red Bear hesitated, warning of the settlers' rifles and numbers, but the chief stepped closer, eyes fierce. "We die as Comanche," he said, silencing doubts. Red Bear nodded and turned to summon the warriors. An elder, White Owl, approached with steady hands. He entrusted Lone Wolf to her care, his fingers lingering on the infant's cheek as he murmured, "Keep him safe." She cradled the boy, nodding solemnly. Facing the warriors, he steeled himself to lead the fight against Cole's camp, knowing his son's safety depended on crushing the enemy. A small fire crackled in the canyon, casting shadows as the chief dragged a whetstone across his tomahawk, sharpening it with steady strokes. Mourning Dove's memory flashed, but he focused on the blade's edge. He stepped into White Owl's tent, where Lone Wolf slept in warm furs, his tiny breaths calming the chief's racing heart. Returning to the camp, he found Red Bear with 10 warriors, their bandaged wounds barely slowing them. Kneeling by the fire, he sketched a map in the dirt, marking Cole's camp by the river. "We flanked them from both sides, hitting before their rifles wake," he explained, tracing the plan with a stick. Red Bear's eyes flickered with doubt, but he agreed to follow. Rising, the chief's voice rang out. "We fight for our blood." The warriors nodded, gripping their bows tightly. He chose 2 men to guard the camp, pointing toward the tent. "No one touches my son," he ordered. Checking his quiver, he ensured each arrow was ready. Kneeling by Lone Wolf's side, he whispered, "I'll return," his voice firm despite the ache of leaving. The settler's crimes fueled his resolve. He led the warriors into the pre-dawn chill, his plan set to ambush Cole's camp and reclaim his people. Dawn broke over the snow-covered trail as the Comanche chief led his warriors through the silent forest, their breaths clouding in the icy air. Red Bear moved beside him, his voice low. "Cole's camp is near the river, just beyond the ridge." The chief nodded, raising a hand to signal quiet movement, ensuring no hoofprints betrayed their path. They reached a low hill overlooking the camp, and he crouched behind a cluster of pines, scanning the terrain. Raucous laughter and clinking bottles echoed from the settlers' tents, stirring his anger. His eyes narrowed as he spotted Rainbird, Mourning Dove's sister, bound and slumped near a central tent, her face bruised. The sight tightened his grip on the tomahawk, but he forced himself to stay focused. He gestured for the warriors to spread out, preparing for a swift strike. Kneeling in the snow, he murmured a brief prayer to the Great Spirit, asking for strength to spill the blood of those who shattered his tribe. The camp's chaos offered an advantage, but the rifles glinting in the settlers' hands demanded precision. He settled into position, heart pounding with the weight of his mission to free Rainbird and crush Cole's men, his resolve sharpened by the need to protect his people. Hooves thundered in the distance as Flint, a wiry settler with cruel eyes, led a small band toward the hidden canyon, unbeknownst to the chief preparing to strike Cole's camp. He had tortured a Comanche prisoner days earlier, extracting the canyon's location. In the canyon, White Owl clutched Lone Wolf in a dim tent, rocking the infant to silence his whimpers. A sharp cry escaped the boy, piercing the quiet. Flint's men stormed in, kicking aside furs, and he grinned, recognizing Mourning Dove's blanket around the child. "Blackhawk's brat," he sneered, snatching Lone Wolf from White Owl's arms, ignoring her pleas. He planned to use the infant as a hostage and sell him to slavers for profit. A young warrior, hiding nearby, escaped the raid and galloped through the snow to reach the chief's position. Bursting through the pines, he gasped, "Flint took Lone Wolf to the trading post." The chief's face froze, his heart lurching at the news of his son's capture. Rage surged, but he knew Cole's camp had to fall first to clear the path to Flint. He gripped his tomahawk, vowing to end Cole quickly and race to save Lone Wolf, his mind racing with the desperate need to protect his only surviving child. Pines cast long shadows as the chief swallowed his fury, motioning for his warriors to take cover around Cole's camp. He peered through the branches, counting 15 settlers with rifles slung over their shoulders, their guard lax from drink. Isaac Cole stood by a roaring fire, laughing with his men, his voice carrying over the river's rush. The chief signaled Red Bear to lead a group around the camp's rear, aiming to trap the settlers in a pincer. He ran his thumb along his tomahawk's blade, its sharp edge gleaming in the fading light, his thoughts fixed on Lone Wolf's tiny, trembling form. Cole's death would open the way to rescue his son, and he steeled himself for the fight. A settler wandered close, boots crunching near their hiding spot, but the chief pressed low, holding his breath until the man passed. He whispered to the warriors, ordering them to wait for nightfall, when the settlers' drunken stupor would dull their aim. The camp's flickering fires and scattered tents offered cover, but the rifles posed a deadly threat. His chest tightened with the urgency to act, yet he forced patience, knowing a hasty move could cost lives and delay his pursuit of Flint to save Lone Wolf. Night cloaked the riverbank as the Comanche chief signaled his warriors, the camp's fires casting flickering shadows. Red Bear hurled a knife, silencing a settler guard with a muffled thud. Arrows flew from the darkness, and Comanche warriors charged, their blades flashing as they cut through the chaos. The chief sprinted toward Isaac Cole, weaving past blazing tents, a bullet grazing his shoulder from Cole's pistol. He flung his tomahawk, the blade sinking into Cole's shoulder, dropping him with a scream. Cole writhed in the snow, but the chief was on him, driving a knife into his chest, ending his life in a single thrust. The settlers scattered, panic erupting as warriors struck down those who resisted. He found Rainbird tied near the central tent, her wrists raw from ropes. Slicing her bonds, he pulled her to her feet, her eyes wide with fear. "Flint took Lone Wolf," she gasped, clutching his arm. He raided the canyon, heading to the trading post. The words hit like a blow, his heart lurching at the thought of his infant son in Flint's hands. The camp was theirs, but Lone Wolf's capture demanded immediate action. He steadied Rainbird, vowing to save his son, his rage now aimed at Flint. Rainbird's words echoed in the chief's mind as he stood over Cole's body, the camp smoldering around them. Flint had struck the canyon and stolen Lone Wolf, targeting his son to break him. He knelt, searching Cole's coat, and found a crumpled note scrawled with Flint and trading post. The warriors gathered captured rifles, their faces grim but determined. Red Bear approached, wiping blood from his knife. "We go now," he urged, but the chief raised a hand, knowing exhaustion could doom them. The warriors needed rest to face Flint's men. He pulled Rainbird close, her trembling frame grounding his resolve. "I'll bring him back," he promised, his voice thick with conviction. He ordered the warriors to prepare horses, his thoughts consumed by Lone Wolf's fragile cries. The trading post was days away, and a storm loomed, threatening a frail infant. He scanned the captured weapons, selecting a rifle for himself, and rallied the men to move out. Flint's cruelty fueled his urgency, but a reckless charge could cost his son's life. The chief mounted his horse, leading the warriors from the ruined camp, determined to reach the trading post and reclaim Lone Wolf. Snow swirled in the dawn light as the chief checked his warriors, their faces set despite the biting cold. He ordered them to pack food and blankets, knowing the storm would test their endurance. Red Bear, scouting ahead, returned with news. The trading post lay 2 days away, buried in worsening weather. The chief's heart sank, picturing Lone Wolf shivering in Flint's grasp, too young to survive the frost. He urged the warriors to pace themselves, preserving strength for the fight ahead. His fingers traced the edge of his knife, still sharp, ready for Flint's blood. Kneeling briefly, he prayed to the ancestors, asking them to guard his son. The group set out, horses plowing through deepening snow, the chief at the lead, his cloak flapping in the wind. The storm was a merciless foe, but he pushed forward, driven by the need to save Lone Wolf before Flint could harm or sell him. Wind howled through the pines, stinging the chief's face as he led his warriors through the blizzard, their horses struggling in the snow. Thick flakes blurred the trail, forcing him to signal a slower pace to avoid losing the path. Red Bear rode back, shouting over the storm. "One man fell! Too cold!" The chief dismounted, helping lift the shivering warrior, and ordered a quick tent set up for warmth. By a small fire he sat, Lone Wolf's cries haunting his thoughts, urging him onward. He commanded the group to press on, the storm growing fiercer. Faint hoofprints in the snow, likely Flint's, caught his eye, guiding their route. He kicked his horse forward, Desperate to reach the trading post before it was too late, his heart pounding with fear for his son's life. A snowy ridge rose ahead as the chief and his warriors crested it, overlooking the trading post nestled in the valley below. Smoke curled from chimneys, and settlers' shouts carried through the storm. Red Bear crouched beside him, counting 12 guards, rifles slung across their backs. The chief's gaze locked on a large cabin, where a faint child's cry drifted out, twisting his gut. He ordered the warriors to split into 2 groups, planning a stealth attack from both sides. His hand tightened on his tomahawk, the blade ready for Flint. "Lone Wolf, I'm here," he whispered, his voice lost in the wind. A guard turned toward their position, and he signaled the warriors to duck low, waiting for the right moment to strike. Stars faded as the Comanche chief crouched on the snowy ridge, watching the trading post's torches flicker in the valley below. He ordered his warriors to wait for nightfall, when the guards' vigilance would falter. Leading a small group, he crept past the wooden fence, dodging pools of torchlight that danced across the snow. Red Bear scaled a low wall, peering into the main cabin's shadows to confirm the entrance. 2 settlers stood guard at the door, their rifles leaning against a crate. The chief signaled his archers to take aim. Arrows knocked silently. He checked the rope coiled at his belt, ready to bind any captives, his mind fixed on Lone Wolf's faint cries from within the cabin. The thought of his infant son in Flint's hands tightened his chest, but he steadied his breathing. He raised his hand and arrows hissed through the dark, striking the guards before they could shout. The path to Lone Wolf was clear, but the chief knew Flint waited inside, armed and ruthless. He gripped his tomahawk, leading the warriors forward, determined to save his son and end Flint's threat. Snow crunched underfoot as the chief slipped toward the cabin, hurling a knife that sank into a guard's throat, dropping him silently. Red Bear loosed an arrow, piercing the second guard's chest, clearing the doorway. The chief shoved the door open, his heart lurching at the sight of Lone Wolf, trapped in a wooden crate, his weak cries barely audible. He rushed forward, hands trembling as he saw his son's pale face, exhausted from cold and hunger. Flint emerged from the shadows, a pistol pressed against the crate, his lips curling into a cruel grin. "Drop your weapons or the brat dies," he snarled. The chief's tomahawk hit the floor with a thud, his eyes locked on Flint, rage simmering beneath his calm facade. Flint's next words chilled him. "Your kind are just goods for the Hudson's Bay Company." The revelation of HBC's involvement stunned the chief, but Lone Wolf's safety was his priority. He stood motionless, planning his next move as Flint's pistol gleamed in the dim light. Flint's mocking voice filled the cabin, taunting the chief. "Comanche fetch a good price for HBC." He kept his composure, edging closer, buying time to outmaneuver the settler. From the back door, Red Bear slipped inside, crouching behind a stack of barrels, unseen by Flint. The settler kicked the crate, making Lone Wolf wail louder, and the chief's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay still. Pretending to comply, he stepped forward, reaching for a rope as if to bind himself. Flint barked, "Tie it tight." The chief moved slowly, his eyes flicking to Red Bear. With a sudden lunge, Red Bear drove his knife into Flint's shoulder, the settler howling as his pistol clattered to the floor. Seizing the moment, the chief tackled Flint, slamming him against the wooden wall. The cabin shook with the impact, and he pinned Flint down, his knee pressing into the man's chest. The fight was far from over, but Lone Wolf was within reach, and the chief's resolve burned stronger than ever. Chaos erupted as the chief pounded his fist into Flint's face, blood spraying from the settler's nose. Red Bear blocked the cabin door, slashing at 2 settlers who rushed in, their bodies crumpling under his blade. The chief kicked the crate open, splintering the wood, and scooped Lone Wolf into his arms, the infant's trembling body cold against his chest. He wrapped the boy in his cloak, relief flooding him as he felt a faint heartbeat. Flint staggered up, pulling the knife and lunging, the blade grazing the chief's shoulder. With a swift kick, he sent Flint crashing into a wall, the settler gasping for air. He nodded to Red Bear, who bound Flint's wrists with rope, keeping him alive for questioning. Outside, Comanche warriors fired arrows, cutting down the remaining guards in a swift volley. The trading post fell quiet, the chief's focus now on saving his son and uncovering Flint's plans. He held Lone Wolf close, knowing the fight wasn't over. A knife pressed against Flint's throat as the chief demanded answers, his voice low and menacing. "Where are the other children?" Flint coughed, a twisted grin spreading despite the blood on his lips. "West, in a town," he rasped, refusing to say more. The chief tightened his grip, but Flint only laughed, choking on blood. Red Bear searched the cabin, finding sacks of settler supplies, enough to sustain the warriors. The chief ordered his men to prepare for departure. Their victory at the trading post, only a step toward rescuing the others. He handed Lone Wolf to Rainbird, who had joined them, her gentle hands calming the infant's cries. "Take care of him," he said, his voice heavy with gratitude. Binding Flint's ropes tighter, he decided to bring the settler along for further questioning. The warriors gathered outside, ready to move. With Lone Wolf safe but the tribe's children still in danger, the chief led his men toward the western town, driven by the need to end the settlers' cruelty. The cabin's floor creaked as the Comanche chief rummaged through a dead settler's coat, pulling out a worn leather notebook. He flipped it open, squinting at scrawled notes detailing deals between the Hudson's Bay Company and American soldiers. The name James Carver stood out, but HBC meant nothing to him yet. He tucked the notebook inside his cloak, vowing to unravel its secrets after saving his people. Red Bear burst in, his face tense. "The blizzard's worsening. We need to move." The chief glanced at Flint, trussed up in the corner, and yanked the ropes tighter to ensure he wouldn't slip free. He ordered his warriors to grab the settlers' food sacks, their strength vital for the journey ahead. Lone Wolf was safe in Rainbird's arms, but other Comanche children remained in danger. The chief's heart raced as he led his men out, the storm's howl urging haste. They had crushed the trading post, but the notebook hinted at a larger enemy, and he steeled himself to face it after rescuing the captives. Snow stung the chief's face as he guided his warriors through the blizzard. Flint bound and slumped on a horse behind them. Rainbird cradled Lone Wolf, wrapping him in thick blankets to shield him from the cold. The chief leaned over, checking his son's pale face, worry gnawing at him as the infant's breath seemed weak, without milk. Red Bear rode up, pointing to fresh hoofprints in the snow, proof settlers had passed recently. He urged the horses faster, though their legs trembled from exhaustion. Memories of Mourning Dove's warmth flashed in his mind, pushing him to save the captured women and children. A warrior shouted, spotting a distant glow through the storm, likely the town. He halted the group, ordering a brief rest to plan their attack, his eyes fixed on the light, knowing every moment delayed risked the captives' lives. The town sprawled below a snowy hill, its ramshackle buildings lit by flickering lanterns, as the chief crouched among frost-covered pines. He scanned the wooden pen where Comanche women were caged, their faces gaunt with despair. Flint, his shoulder bandaged, stood outside, barking prices to drunken settlers, treating the women like livestock. Red Bear's teeth ground audibly, his hand twitching toward his knife, but the chief gripped his arm, urging restraint. Counting 20 guards with rifles, he knew a direct assault would be suicide. He devised a plan to set the town's whiskey barrels ablaze, creating chaos to free the prisoners. Red Bear pulled out fire-tipped arrows, checking their wicks. "Flint ends tonight," the chief vowed, his voice low and fierce, driven by the need to protect his tribe and avenge his family's suffering. Darkness settled over the town, its streets quiet save for the settlers' drunken laughter. As the chief signaled his warriors to wait, he led a small group through the shadows, creeping toward a stack of whiskey barrels near the town's edge. Red Bear tied oil-soaked rags to his arrows, his movements swift and precise. The chief watched the guards, noting their slouched postures as they passed bottles around a fire. He gestured for his archers to aim at the nearest sentries by the pen, ready to strike once the chaos began. His fingers tested the edge of his knife, sharp enough to cut through ropes in an instant. Lone Wolf's safety fueled his resolve to free the women and secure a future for his son. He nodded to Red Bear, who lit an arrow and sent it soaring, the flame arcing toward the barrels. Flames roared as the arrow struck the whiskey barrels, igniting a blaze that lit up the snowy night. Guards shouted, stumbling from their posts to battle the fire, leaving the pen unguarded. The chief darted forward, his knife slicing through the ropes binding the Comanche women. He found Rainbird among them, her face bruised and swollen, barely able to stand. Supporting her weight, he urged her to lead the women to the hill, where warriors waited. A settler spotted them, raising his rifle with a yell, but the chief threw his knife, the blade lodging in the man's throat, dropping him instantly. Comanche warriors surged from the shadows, their arrows and blades cutting through the remaining guards. The town descended into chaos, the fire spreading, but the chief's focus remained on saving his people and confronting Flint, who still lurked in the inferno. Flames roared through the town, casting a red glow as the Comanche chief guided the freed women through the chaos, dodging bullets that whizzed past their heads. From a rooftop, Red Bear let arrows fly, each one finding its mark, dropping 3 settlers in quick succession, their bodies slumping into the snow. The chief's eyes caught Flint near a tent, his voice barking orders to the panicked guards. Sprinting across the burning street, he ignored the heat licking his skin and ducked a bullet that grazed his shoulder. Flint bolted inside the tent, but the chief pursued, kicking the flap open with a crash. He seized Flint by the collar, slamming a fist into his face, blood spurting from the settler's nose. Flint fumbled for his pistol, but the chief grabbed his wrist, twisting until the bones snapped, the gun falling uselessly. Binding Flint's hands with rope, he dragged the groaning man outside, determined to make him answer for Lone Wolf's kidnapping and the tribe's suffering. The fight raged around them, but the chief's focus remained on securing the captives and confronting Flint's treachery. The freed women stumbled through the snow, their breaths ragged, as the chief ordered his warriors to escort them to the safety of the hill. He knelt beside Rainbird, her bruised face pale but resolute, and helped her stand, relieved she could walk. Red Bear ran up, his voice tense. "One of our men took a bullet. We need to pull back." The chief nodded, yanking Flint along as a human shield, his bound form stumbling in the snow. He weaved through the gunfire, leading the group to the pines, where the settlers' shots fell short. Rainbird, catching her breath, revealed that Flint had been selling Comanche children to HBC traders. Fury surged in the chief's chest, and he tightened the ropes on Flint's wrists, demanding to know where the children were. Flint's lips curled into a sneer. "An old warehouse, west of here." The chief's mind raced, planning the next move to rescue the children and unravel HBC's role. Inside a smoldering tent, the chief rifled through Flint's belongings, pulling out a crumpled letter penned by an HBC deserter. The paper exposed HBC's plot to fund massacres and seize native lands, a truth that froze him in place. He read the name James Carver, HBC's director, scrawled at the bottom, realizing the settlers were pawns in a larger scheme. The letter's weight sank into him, but the children's safety came first. Red Bear stormed in, knife drawn, urging, "End Flint now." The chief shook his head, needing Flint alive to confirm the warehouse's location. He ordered the warriors to retreat to the canyon, keeping Flint and the letter secure. Checking the freed women, he ensured they were unharmed, their grateful nods fueling his resolve. The town burned behind them, a victory won, but HBC's shadow loomed larger than he'd imagined. pushing him to protect his tribe and expose the company's crimes. The canyon's cliffs loomed as the chief led his warriors back, Flint tied to a horse, his head bowed in defeat. Rainbird clutched Lone Wolf, tears falling as she rocked the infant, safe but frail. He gathered the tribe, recounting the town's destruction, his voice steady despite the weight of loss. Holding up the HBC letter, he explained its revelations about the company's atrocities, the survivors gasping at the betrayal. Red Bear, pacing, demanded an immediate attack, but the chief raised a hand, knowing haste could doom them. He assigned warriors to guard Flint in a sealed tent, ensuring no escape. Sitting by a small fire, he thought of Mourning Dove's gentle touch, now replaced by Lone Wolf's fragile warmth. The tribe's future rested on finding the children and stopping HBC, and he vowed to lead that fight, his heart steeled against the growing threat. A knife glinted in the dim tent as the chief pressed it to Flint's throat, demanding answers. "Where are the children?" Flint smirked, blood crusting his lips. "HBC's too big for you." A sharp punch to Flint's stomach silenced his taunts, and he gasped. An abandoned warehouse west. Red Bear, standing by, growled, "He's lying. Kill him." The chief held him back, needing Flint's information verified. He ordered horses readied for the warehouse, the next step in saving the children. Stepping outside, he checked on Lone Wolf, worry deepening as the infant's cries grew weaker. The tribe depended on him, and he led his warriors out, Flint in tow, driven to rescue the captives and confront the shadowy power of HBC. The canyon's firelight faded as the Comanche chief gathered a small team, picking Red Bear and 3 skilled warriors for the mission to the warehouse. He knelt beside Rainbird, who cradled Lone Wolf in her arms, the infant's faint whimpers tugging at his heart. "Keep him warm," he said, his voice low, ensuring his son's safety before leaving. Red Bear tested his bowstring, arrows sharp, and strapped a knife to his belt, ready for blood. The chief packed food and blankets, knowing the cold journey would test them. He checked Flint, tightening the ropes, binding the settler to a spare horse, his sneer ignored. Ordering the remaining warriors to guard the canyon, he stood alone for a moment, whispering a prayer to the ancestors for guidance. With a final glance at Lone Wolf, he mounted his horse and led the group into the snowy forest, driven to free the captive children and uncover HBC's schemes. Snow blanketed the forest path, muffling the horses' hooves as the chief guided his team through the storm, eyes scanning for threats. He glanced back at Flint, ensuring the settlers' ropes held, his silence a small victory. Red Bear pointed to fresh wagon tracks, a sign the warehouse was close. The chief signaled a slower pace, wary of settler lookouts hidden in the pines. Thoughts of the imprisoned children fueled his anger, their cries echoing in his mind. A warrior raised his hand, spotting a faint glow ahead, the warehouse's light piercing the blizzard. He ordered the group to dismount and take cover, their breaths clouding in the icy air. Running his thumb along his knife's edge, he prepared for the fight, determined to save the children and make Flint pay. Pines loomed over the abandoned warehouse, its sagging roof barely visible in the snow as the chief crouched behind a tree, counting 8 settler guards. 2 carried rifles, pacing the perimeter, while the others wielded knives and pistols. Red Bear whispered, pointing to iron cages inside, where 4 Comanche children huddled, their soft cries cutting through the wind. The chief assigned Red Bear to take out the outermost guard, his hand steady on his tomahawk. Creeping closer, he heard the children's whimpers, his resolve hardening. Flint, bound nearby, smirked, confirming the captive's presence, his arrogance fueling the chief's anger. He signaled the warriors to ready their bows, arrows aimed at the guards. "You're almost free," he murmured to the unseen children, his heart set on their rescue and crushing the settlers' operation. Torches flickered outside the warehouse as the chief raised his hand, signaling the attack. Red Bear's knife flashed, slicing a guard's throat, the man collapsing without a sound. The chief darted forward, grabbing the second guard's neck, choking him before he could shout, his body slumping into the snow. Pushing the warehouse door open, he saw 4 children in iron cages, their small forms shivering. He rushed to the nearest cage, prying the lock with his knife, hands trembling with urgency. A settler inside yelled, raising a rifle, but the chief hurled his knife, the blade burying into the man's chest, blood spraying as he fell. Red Bear and the warriors stormed in, arrows whistling through the air, piercing 3 more guards, their pistols clattering uselessly. The settlers, outnumbered, fought back with knives, one slashing a warrior's arm before an arrow ended him. No civilians lingered nearby. The warehouse isolated, but the battle was fierce, leaving 6 settlers dead, blood pooling on the wooden floor. The chief freed the children, lifting them from the cages, their tear-streaked faces clinging to him. Flint's sudden shout from the shadows, "More men behind!" broke the brief calm, signaling a new wave of danger. The children's cries filled the warehouse as the chief ordered his warriors to hustle them to safety, their small feet stumbling through the snow. He spun around, catching Flint struggling against his ropes, trying to flee. Lunging forward, he tackled the settler, slamming him to the floor, the impact echoing off the walls. Red Bear fired arrows from the doorway, dropping 2 settlers who charged from the rear, their rifles firing wild shots that splintered the wooden beams. Flint yanked a hidden knife, stabbing at the chief's leg, the blade slicing flesh, forcing him to his knees with a grunt. Gritting his teeth, he smashed his fist into Flint's jaw, knocking him out cold, blood trickling from the settler's mouth. He signaled Red Bear to bind Flint tighter, dragging him outside as the warriors reported the remaining settlers had fled into the storm. The warehouse stood silent, 7 settler bodies scattered, their blood staining the snow, while 1 Comanche warrior nursed a wound. No townsfolk were near, the isolated warehouse sparing civilian lives. Holding a trembling child, the chief led his group away, the victory bittersweet with Flint's warning ringing in his ears. The warehouse's embers glowed faintly as the Comanche chief knelt beside the freed children, their thin frames shivering and stomachs hollow from hunger. He ordered his warriors to wrap them in blankets, their gentle hands securing the children for the trek back to the canyon. Red Bear scoured the warehouse, hauling out sacks of settler grain and stacks of woolen blankets, enough to sustain the group. The chief yanked Flint by his ropes, keeping the settler close as a hostage, his presence a grim reminder of the fight ahead. Thoughts of Lone Wolf's fragile cries spurred him to save every Comanche child. A small girl, no older than 5, clutched his hand, whispering, "Father." His lips curved into a faint smile, though his heart ached for his own lost daughter. He lifted her onto a warrior's horse, ensuring she was secure. Leading the group through the snow, he kept a sharp eye for ambushes, determined to bring the children to safety and continue his hunt for the remaining captives. Snow crunched underfoot as the chief guided his warriors back to the canyon, the children bundled warmly on horseback. Rainbird rushed forward, tears streaming as she embraced the children, her joy echoing through the camp. He gathered the tribe, recounting the warehouse raid, his voice steady despite the weight of their losses. The tribe listened in awe, their spirits lifting at the rescue. He organized a quiet ceremony for fallen warriors, singing a mournful song to honor their sacrifice, the wind carrying their spirits. Checking on Lone Wolf, he found the infant stronger, Rainbird's care bringing color to his cheeks. The HBC notebook burned in his thoughts, and he decided to send it to a trusted settler journalist to expose their crimes. Planning the final strike against HBC, he rallied the tribe, their resolve mirroring his own, ready to face the company's shadow. A cold dawn broke as the chief sent 2 warriors to a nearby town, entrusting them with the HBC notebook and letter to deliver to a journalist. They carried his story of the massacres, determined to spread the truth. He instructed them to report back on James Carver's fate, hoping for justice. Patrolling the canyon's edges, he ensured no settler scouts lurked, the cliffs silent under the snow. Rainbird approached, suggesting an alliance with the Kiowa to strengthen their fight against HBC. Nodding, he dispatched a messenger to the Kiowa, seeking their aid. Sitting beside Lone Wolf, he watched the infant sleep, his tiny fists curled, a reminder of why he fought. Red Bear's absence weighed heavily, but he vowed to honor his friend's sacrifice by defeating HBC, his mind already planning the next steps. The Kiowa messenger arrived, his horse laden with sacks of dried meat, signaling their agreement to join forces. The chief met with their representative in the canyon, sharing tales of Red Bear's bravery, his words sparking determination in the Kiowa's eyes. They pledged warriors to counter any HBC retaliation, strengthening the alliance. He offered a finely crafted dagger to seal the bond, its blade glinting in the firelight. Ordering his men to fortify the canyon's defenses, he ensured they were ready for any attack. Rainbird tended to the rescued children, their laughter a hopeful sound amid the grief. The chief felt a spark of optimism, though his guard remained up, knowing HBC's reach was vast. The alliance was a step toward victory, but the fight was far from over. Hoofbeats echoed as a warrior returned from town, his voice ringing with news. James Carver faced public trial for HBC's crimes. Relief washed over the chief, a sign that justice was near, though the battle wasn't won. He shared the update with the tribe, their cheers filling the canyon, a rare moment of triumph. Rainbird smiled, noting how their story spread across the west, inspiring others. Checking on Lone Wolf, he saw the infant's cheeks fuller, his strength growing under Rainbird's care. He ordered nightly patrols, wary of HBC's lingering threat. Red Bear's memory lingered, a quiet ache for the friend who'd never see this day. Planning a move to a safer land, the chief gathered his people, ready to build a new future while preparing to crush HBC's final remnants. Firelight danced across the canyon as the Comanche chief stood before his tribe, holding up the HBC notebook, his voice steady as he recounted the company's atrocities against their people. He entrusted Rainbird with Lone Wolf and the wounded, her gentle nod reassuring him. Selecting 15 of his strongest warriors, he prepared them for the trek to the military fort where James Carver hid. Kneeling beside Lone Wolf, he brushed the infant's cheek, whispering to Rainbird, "Keep him safe." Red Bear, though not present, lingered in his thoughts as a loyal ally, and the chief checked his own bow and arrows, ensuring they were ready. He tucked the notebook and letter inside his cloak, their weight a reminder of the truth he'd expose. Bowing his head, he prayed to the ancestors for strength in the battle ahead. Leading his warriors out of the canyon, he set his sights on the fort, determined to confront Carver and end HBC's reign of terror. The forest's snow-laden branches swayed as the chief guided his warriors toward the military fort, their horses moving swiftly through the dusk. To avoid settler patrols, he directed the group around a quiet valley, keeping to the shadows. A warrior pointed out fresh boot tracks, and the chief halted, scanning the terrain for ambushes before choosing a safer path. He trusted Red Bear's memory, wishing his friend's fierce spirit could join them. Another warrior spotted smoke rising from the fort, just half a day away. The chief's leg ached from the warehouse wound, but he gritted his teeth, urging the group to hasten. Carver's fort loomed closer, and he steeled himself for the confrontation, knowing the truth about HBC had to reach the world. A hill overlooked the fort, its stone walls bristling with HBC flags as the chief crouched behind a snow-dusted boulder. He counted 30 soldiers, their rifles gleaming as they patrolled the gates, a formidable force. A warrior gestured toward a large building, likely Carver's headquarters, its windows glowing with lantern light. Townsfolk milled nearby, some with notebooks, possibly journalists, offering a chance to expose HBC publicly. The chief planned to slip inside and confront Carver before the crowd, forcing him to face the evidence. He ordered a small group to follow Red Bear's strategy, staying ready to support from outside. Clutching the notebook and letter, he crept toward the fort, heart pounding. A guard's gaze swept close, and he froze, breath held, waiting for the man to turn away. The fort's meeting hall buzzed with voices as the chief slipped through a side door, spotting James Carver at a table, his polished coat stark against the rough soldiers. He surged forward, grabbing Carver's collar and pressing a knife to his throat before the guards could react. "Lower your rifles," he growled, and the soldiers hesitated, barrels wavering. Carver sneered, his voice cold. "HBC will crush your tribes." The chief tossed the notebook and letter onto the table, demanding Carver read the proof of HBC's massacres. Townsfolk and journalists pushed into the room, drawn by the commotion, their gasps rising as he spoke of Mourning Dove's death and the stolen children. Carver scoffed, calling him a savage, but the crowd's murmurs grew sympathetic. Then Carver shouted, "Shoot him!" The soldiers raised their rifles, defying the onlookers, and chaos erupted, the chief bracing for the fight that would decide HBC's fate. Rifle shots cracked through the hall, bullets splintering the wooden walls as the chief dove for cover, but Red Bear leaped in front, shielding him. 2 bullets tore into Red Bear's chest, blood spraying as he collapsed, his body limp on the stone floor. The chief roared, clutching his friend, eyes burning with rage and grief. He shoved Carver aside, charging a soldier, wresting the rifle from his hands and clubbing him down, blood pooling from the man's cracked skull. The hall became a battlefield. 30 soldiers fired rifles and swung bayonets, met by 15 Comanche warriors who burst in, loosing arrows and wielding knives. Arrows pierced 5 soldiers' throats, their bodies crumpling, while 3 warriors fell to gunfire, blood staining the floor. The chief's knife slashed another soldier's arm, disarming him. Journalists and townsfolk screamed, scrambling for cover. Some trampled in the panic, though most survived behind crates. A journalist grabbed the notebook, shouting, "This proves HBC's crimes." The crowd surged, grappling with soldiers, turning the fight into a melee. Dragging Red Bear's body to a corner, the chief saw his friend's lifeless eyes, his heart shattering as he fought on. Carver's exposure now sealed by blood. The hall's chaos swirled as the Comanche chief rose, his knife pressed against James Carver's throat, dragging the HBC director to the center of the room. "You'll pay for the blood you've spilled," he roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Carver squirmed, his polished coat tearing, but the chief's grip held him still, silencing his protests. A journalist, clutching the blood-stained notebook, read its contents aloud, detailing HBC's massacres, and the crowd erupted in angry shouts, their faces twisted with outrage. The chief spoke of Mourning Dove's death and his stolen children, his words heavy with grief, stirring murmurs of sympathy from the townsfolk. Enraged settlers and journalists surged forward, encircling Carver, demanding his arrest. He stepped back, releasing Carver to the mob, who bound his wrists with coarse rope, their cheers for justice ringing out. The truth of HBC's crimes was exposed, but Red Bear's lifeless body lay nearby, a painful reminder of the cost. Gunfire echoed as the chief hoisted Red Bear's body, sprinting from the hall, bullets splintering the wooden doorframe. Comanche warriors poured in, their arrows slicing through the air, striking 5 pursuing soldiers, blood pooling beneath their crumpled forms. He handed Red Bear's body to a warrior, ordering its return to the canyon for burial. Turning back, he saw journalists snapping photographs of the notebook and Carver, now trussed in the courtyard, as townsfolk shouted for a trial. The chief bolted through the fort's gate, dodging rifle shots from the watchtowers, the bullets kicking up snow around him. Red Bear's sacrifice clawed at his heart, a wound deeper than the one in his leg. Leading his remaining warriors, he vanished into the forest, the fort's chaos fading behind them, his mind set on honoring his friend and finishing HBC. The canyon's cliffs loomed in the moonlight as the chief staggered into camp, embracing Rainbird and Lone Wolf, the infant's warmth easing his grief. He gathered the tribe, voice breaking as he recounted Red Bear's sacrifice, tears falling among the survivors. Rainbird checked Lone Wolf, noting his growing strength, a small victory amid the sorrow. He led a somber ceremony, singing a farewell song for Red Bear, the melody drifting into the starry sky, as if carrying his spirit. The loss ached, but he felt Red Bear's presence in the wind. Deciding to send the HBC evidence to journalists, he aimed to ensure Carver's downfall. Ordering nightly patrols to guard against retaliation, he scanned the canyon's edges, wary of HBC's reach. The tribe knelt by the fire, praying for Red Bear, their unity strengthening the chief's resolve to protect them. A council fire burned as the chief met with the elders, discussing strategies to counter HBC's lingering threat. He entrusted Rainbird with Lone Wolf's care, her steady hands calming the infant, and kissed his son's forehead, vowing to keep him safe. Selecting 2 warriors, he sent them to deliver the notebook to a journalist, spreading the truth of HBC's crimes. He ordered the tribe to gather food, preparing for a potential move to safer lands. Rainbird spoke of the rescued children, their smiles a testament to his efforts, warming his heavy heart. Mourning Dove's memory drove him to finish this fight, to secure a future for his people. His leg's wound throbbed, nearly healed, but he ignored the pain, focusing on the next steps. The tribe rested, ready for the challenges ahead, their trust in him unwavering. Dawn's light crept over the canyon as the chief dispatched warriors to a nearby town, carrying the HBC notebook and letter to a journalist. They were tasked with sharing the tribe's story, ensuring Carver's crimes reached the world. He instructed them to bring news of Carver's fate, hoping for confirmation of justice. Walking the canyon's perimeter, he found no signs of settler scouts, the silence reassuring. Rainbird suggested forging an alliance with the Kiowa to bolster their defense against HBC. Agreeing, he sent a messenger to the Kiowa, seeking their strength. Sitting beside Lone Wolf, he watched the infant's peaceful sleep, a rare moment of calm. Red Bear's sacrifice weighed on him, but he swore to make it count, planning the tribe's next move to dismantle HBC's power and secure a safe future. Horses snorted in the canyon's chill as a Kiowa messenger arrived, his saddlebags heavy with dried meat, signaling their pledge to ally against HBC. The Comanche chief gathered the Kiowa representative by a fire, outlining plans to counter the company's threat, their shared resolve hardening with each word. He spoke of Red Bear's courage, his voice steady as the tribe listened, the story igniting a spark in the Kiowa's eyes. They vowed to send warriors if HBC struck back, a promise that bolstered the chief's hope. Offering a polished dagger, its handle carved with Comanche symbols, he sealed the alliance. The gesture met with a firm nod. He directed his warriors to fortify the canyon's defenses, ensuring no settler could breach their refuge. Rainbird moved among the rescued children, checking their health, her gentle smile confirming their recovery. Hope stirred in the chief's chest, though he remained vigilant, knowing HBC's shadow lingered, and he prepared for any final challenge to protect his people. A warrior shout broke the dawn, announcing his return from town with news. James Carver faced a public trial, his crimes laid bare. The chief exhaled, feeling justice draw near, a weight lifting from his shoulders. He shared the tidings with the tribe, their cheers echoing off the canyon walls, a rare moment of triumph. Rainbird noted how their struggle inspired others across the West, her words warming the camp. Checking Lone Wolf, he found the infant's cheeks rosy, thriving under Rainbird's care. He ordered patrols to watch for HBC retaliation, their vigilance unbroken. Red Bear's absence stung, a silent regret that his friend missed this victory. Determined to secure a safer future, he began planning a move to new lands, rallying the tribe for the journey ahead. The elders gathered under a starlit sky, their voices low as the chief proposed a distant valley as their new home, free from settler reach. He instructed the tribe to pack food and blankets, preparing for the long trek through the snow. Rainbird led the children in a Comanche song, their voices rising, lifting the camp spirits. Visiting the rescued children, he saw their smiles, a sign of healing that eased his burdened heart. He sent warriors to scout the route, ensuring no ambushes awaited. Holding Lone Wolf, he whispered a promise of a brighter future, the infant's warmth grounding him. Kneeling by the fire, he prayed to the ancestors for guidance, their presence felt in the wind. The tribe ready to leave the canyon, their steps firm as they moved toward a new beginning. Sunlight bathed the valley as the chief delivered the HBC notebook and letter to journalists, their reports spreading across the West, exposing the company's atrocities. HBC collapsed under public outcry, and Carver received a life sentence, justice finally served. Leading his tribe to the new valley, the chief oversaw the building of sturdy tents and a school where Rainbird taught Comanche traditions, preserving their story for generations. Lone Wolf grew stronger, his laughter a symbol of the tribe's hope. The chief forged a lasting alliance with the Kiowa, securing peace through shared strength. Standing on a hill, he felt Mourning Dove and Red Bear in the breeze, their spirits at rest. The tribe sang a victory song, its melody soaring, affirming their resilience. The Comanche endured, their future bright despite the scars of battle.